So we wanted to do something a little bit different for our afternoon keynote. And when Kush and I first started talking online about all of this, we just had so much fun talking to each other that we thought actually this might be a better format for the afternoon. So hopefully you guys don't mind, but we're going to be doing it a bit this way instead, and gives you a chance to kind of have a chance to get to know us. So I think maybe to get started, I kind of again rushed on here, but Kush, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you do?
Sure. Thank you very much, Caitlin. It's a real honor to be here today. So I guess I wanted to start with my disability. So I'm a disabled person. I have a condition called multiple epiphyseal dysplasia, which is a genetic condition I've had since childhood. It's very similar to arthritis, so my joints have grown differently. And when I was young, my hips used to dislocate very regularly. And the advice that I got from the medical professionals was that I can have hip replacements, but if I have them very young, as my skeleton grows, I'll need to have a number of iterations. So the advice was to have them when my skeleton had fully developed. But the thing that was never really fully explained to me was the impact it would have on my ability to study. So I just thought I was an average student. I had average GCSEs, A-levels, and a degree. But when I had both my hips replaced in 2002, I started to excel in everything I put my mind to, because I could literally just sit and study for longer periods of time, which I could never do at that point. And my career initially kind of went into the corporate world. So I joined organizations like the BBC, Bloomberg, HSBC. I became an investment banker. I joined Lehman Brothers in 2005. I found them to be very arrogant. So I left Lehman Brothers. I remember when I left Lehman Brothers, people told me at that time, nobody leaves Lehman Brothers. They employ the top 1% and the top 1% of them. Did an MBA, got a distinction, and joined Morgan Stanley. And that's when Lehman's collapsed. So they were the largest corporate bankruptcy in the history of the world at the time. And that had a very profound effect on me, because I really started to contemplate, what's my purpose in life? Is it just to accrue wealth? Is the sole purpose of my life just to have a bigger house and a bigger car? And I just thought that was ridiculous. I thought, I have a disability, why don't I try to help disabled people? So around 2010, I completely pivoted careers and focused on disability inclusion, becoming an entrepreneur, setting up a charity called Choice International. And things hadn't really gone exactly. I was hoping to transform systems and make systemic change, and that didn't really happen. And I remember in 2012, I go on these silent meditation retreats. And it was day 7 of one of these silent meditation retreats. You have no contact with the outside world, no phone, no internet, no communication. And I basically ended up getting kicked off the retreat for not having lunch. But it ended up being very fortuitous. On day 7, I got a phone call from LOCOG, the Olympic Committee, and they said that I was the last person to accept to be a torchbearer for London Paralympic Games. If they couldn't contact me that day, they would have had to give this opportunity to somebody else. And that had a real kind of transformative impact upon me. It started to open lots of doors, but also I went through this process of reframing. I think when I was young, I labeled my disability as a curse. I have an Indian kind of heritage, believing in karma. So I used to think, why am I smaller? Why am I weaker? Why do I have so much pain? But then I realized my disability is actually a blessing. It's helped me transform my career from being an investment banker to adding social value. It gives me all these wonderful attributes of being humble, being kind of focused, determined. And that aspect of reframing for me was really powerful, because before it used to be a weight that used to hold me down, and now it's given me kind of direction and purpose in my life. And then I did actually start to transform systems. So I joined a charity called Level Playing Field. They were focusing on transforming the Premier League to make Premier League football clubs more proportionally representational to the number of wheelchair users in society. So if you take Chelsea Football Club, for example, a 40,000-seater stadium, they could technically have 1 or 2 wheelchair spaces, an accessible toilet, entrance, and they're meeting the Equality Act, but they weren't proportionally representational to the number of wheelchair users in society. So the charity was passing a bill in the House of Lords. We were working with media organisations, grassroots campaign, and I became friends with the director for the redevelopment of Chelsea Football Club. And they were planning to move to Wembley Stadium at the time when Roman Abramovich was the owner. And the 2 biggest offenders at that time were Chelsea and Manchester United, and that led to transforming the whole of the Premier League in 2017. And as a disabled lad myself growing up in London, it really had a very profound impact. I remember going to a football game and thinking that if I can survive this environment, I can survive anywhere. And it gave me the confidence to do whatever I really wanted to do in life, and kind of led on to much greater systems change from that initial campaign.
Well, and I think that leads really nicely onto my next question. It's almost like you've seen these, which is, you've done so many amazing things and worked across a number of brilliant programs. What, to date, are you the most proud of?
I would say I'm most proud of transforming the largest health system in the world, NHS England. And I guess probably people will ask, so how do you transform a system like NHS England? It's the 5th largest employer in the world, over 1 million employees. So a similar time to after we finished with the Premier League, I was a patient governor at Chelsea Westminster Hospital. So Chelsea Westminster Hospital is one of the leading NHS trusts in England. Our chairman was the chair of all the London trusts. Our chief executive had been voted top CEO by HSJ Journal. 2 hospitals had merged to make one trust, West Middlesex, where they charge for disabled parking, and Chelsea Westminster, where they didn't charge for disabled parking. They wanted to standardise their policies. So they come back with the proposition they'll start charging for disabled parking in Chelsea Westminster Hospital, the borough with the highest income inequality anywhere in the country. And I thought, honestly, maybe they don't know the stats. Maybe they're just completely oblivious to disability. So I went through the evidence base. I presented that to them. I said the UN has stated there's been a systematic violation of disabled people's rights in the UK, that only 1/3 of London's tube stations are accessible with step-free access, that disability is now the strongest predictor of poverty in the UK. That didn't change their mind. One of our values as a trust is unfailingly kind. I tried values. That didn't change their mind. Then I tried corporate governance. As a patient governor, I'm elected by the members, so I got the whole of the Council of Governors to strongly oppose. That did have an impact. They delayed their decision from 2018 to 2019. So when they announced their decision to charge disabled parking in 2019 in the board meeting, I said to them, if you do this, I'll start a national campaign to abolish all disabled car parking charges in all NHS hospitals in England. Because I thought, if I've helped to transform the Premier League, why can't I transform NHS England? At that time, not even knowing how many NHS hospitals were in England. And they just looked at me and said, you're welcome to do what you want, Kush. I said, fine, I will. So I had been a trustee with a charity called Disability Rights UK. I became an ambassador with them. And a week later, there's a health think tank in London called the King's Fund. Matt Hancock was our Minister of Health and Social Care at the time, and he was doing the keynote speech. So after he does his keynote speech, there's an opportunity for Q&A. I jump up, put my hand up, don't give anyone else a chance. I go through the evidence base, the UN, the systematic violation of disabled people's rights, only 1/3 of tube stations being accessible, disability being the strongest predictor of poverty. I stated what was happening in Chelsea Westminster, and I mentioned the campaign to abolish all disabled car parking charges in England. When I mentioned the campaign, the whole of the audience of the King's Fund applauded the campaign. Then I asked the minister for his support, and as politicians so often do, he just ignored me. At the same event, there was Simon Stevens. Now, Simon Stevens was the CEO of NHS England. At that time, he was considered the most powerful person in the NHS. I approached him privately. Again, evidence-based, campaign, what's happening in Chelsea Westminster Hospital, and I asked for his support. And all Simon Stevens could do, a 6-7 foot, very tall white guy, he just laughed in my face for like 5 minutes, with all his professional advisors around him, just laughing at me like, how audacious, you think you can challenge the NHS? Who are you? But the world works in mysterious ways. There were journalists in the audience of the King's Fund, from the Times and the Telegraph. They contact me on LinkedIn, wanting an exclusive interview. I leave the conference and I interview with the Times and the Telegraph. The following day, the Daily Mail contacts me. So on the Monday, we were published in the Times, the Telegraph, and the Daily Mail. The campaign goes into the stratosphere. The following day, BBC London contacts us. I get my colleague to interview with BBC London. And the next board meeting with Chelsea Westminster Hospital, I bring in papers of the Times, the Telegraph, and the Daily Mail, and I throw them on the boardroom table. They decide to delay their decision. And then I start working with lots of grassroots disability rights organisations and MPs from all the main political parties. And this was 2019, and we managed to get the campaign into the Labour manifesto, the Tory manifesto, and I got agreement by the Lib Dems the day before the general election. So we transformed over 200 NHS hospitals in England, helping 2.5 million disabled blue badge holders to access critical healthcare. This was supposed to be implemented in January 2020, in the beginning of the campaign, in the beginning of the pandemic, and they delayed it until April 2021. But I got the UK government to invest £1 billion into this policy initiative over a 10-year period. And it was the most significant disability inclusion policy change to have happened during the pandemic and the cost of living crisis. And then in 2019, I was also selected as the second most powerful and influential disabled person in the UK with the Shaw Trust Disability Power 100. And 2 years ago, I received an honorary doctorate from Kent University. And during the graduation, they said this was the most significant and impactful change in the treatment of disabled people since the founding of the NHS. And the NHS was recently 75 years old.
Thank you so much, and I just think it's so inspiring. I think you've touched on a little bit on terms of what are the key drivers for change when trying to make an impact at that larger systems level. But did you want to elaborate on that a little bit more?
I think it's really important that when we're trying to transform systems, we go for win-win situations. Like, honestly, I never knew there was going to be a general election in 2019. And we kind of want politicians to do what's right, but generally I found that they do what's in their own interest. And if we look at 2019, there were two main factors of the general election. One was Brexit, where they were strong, and the other one was the NHS, where they were weak. They saw my campaign and they extended it to long-term inpatients, parents of sick children, NHS night staff, and disabled people with blue badges. But when does a person become a long-term inpatient? The only thing that they actually implemented permanently was the disability element. So I think it's really important we kind of focus on win-win situations when creating systems change. The other thing that I think is also really important is looking at the business case. The NHS may be the largest health organisation in the world with 1 million employees. But if you look at disabled people, they estimate disabled people having a total global population of 1.85 billion. That's a population larger than China. A global purchasing power of $13 trillion. Even if you just look at the UK, it's estimated at 16 million and a purchasing power of 274 billion. So sometimes we can feel very isolated, we can feel very weak, but actually we're representing a much larger body than even these large systems that we're challenging.
I think that's great, and I think it's, we've talked a lot about that too, of making sure that people realise that they're not alone and that they can work together to have their voices heard. We've talked a bit as well about how we're part of the wider inclusive and accessible conversation here at Ctrl. A lot of the talks we've been doing so far have been talking specifically about innovation and technology. Are there any particular challenges or opportunities that you think innovation and technology presents?
Sure. I was fortunate to have organised one of Stephen Hawking's last keynote speeches. And I think when you look at technology and innovation, like assistive technology, the only reason we knew that Stephen Hawking, a disabled person who was probably the cleverest person alive during his time, creating discoveries about space and black holes, really changing our knowledge, was because of assistive technology. So it kind of shows you the power of technology and innovation. But I've recently come back from India, a population of 1.4 billion. And I sometimes try to kind of carry a thought experiment out, is how many Stephen Hawkings were born in places like India or Africa who never had the assistive technology. We never found out they were geniuses. They never transformed the world because they didn't have the tech and the right support. And I think that shows the challenges. So one of the things I'm really concerned right now is we have so much great tech innovation of AI, we've seen VR, AR, quantum computing, but digital exclusion, like my parents, they don't use the internet. They struggle using a mobile phone. When we're going to have a digital-first society, products and services being online, currently, like I'm a trustee at AbilityNet, we focus on making the digital world accessible for all, providing free IT support. But the truth is the state is going to have to focus on digital exclusion, the NHS. Eventually you can imagine a world where there's not going to be any job centres, everything's just going to be online. So if a person can't access online, how are they supposed to access benefits or social security or all these different services if we're not going to focus on those who are excluded?
I think that's a brilliant point. And I think, that really making sure that we are continuously coming back to that question of not only what is great, but who can access it and how can they access it. So thank you. Is there anything you're really excited about in terms of moves in a positive direction towards accessibility and inclusion?
Sure. So after the NHS campaign, it kind of merged into the next campaign, which was focusing on transforming Greater London. So during the height of the pandemic in October 2021, Inner London introduced an ultra-low emission zone. So the world's first ultra-low emission zone. But what they did was they only provided an exemption if the car was tax classified as disabled. driver or disabled passenger. The issue there is you can only tax classify a car as disabled if you receive the highest rates of benefits. The category below, as in if a person has a blue badge or standard rate mobility, PIP or DLA, wasn't exempt. So ULEZ was essentially a £12.50 charge per day to access the NHS, primary care, secondary care, social care, going to the supermarket, literally doing anything. And we know that our public transport system is not accessible. And in a pandemic where, I don't know if people know this stat, but if you know this stat, please put your hand up, because 60% of COVID-19 deaths are disabled people, even though disabled people amount to 17% of the population. And this is from the Office of National Statistics. They knew these stats and they still implemented policies without reasonable adjustments. And for that to happen in my city was just unacceptable. So I started another campaign, and we had good publicity again, you know, from Evening Standard, My London, Daily Mail, Express, Sun. I was on BBC London, BBC Politics London. I managed to get a vote at the London Assembly. I had 2 political parties support, 2 political parties against. I had the Tories support me, I had the Green Party support me, I had Labour and Lib Dem against, and I lost the vote at the London Assembly by 2 votes. So I was completely devastated. But then they decided to extend the ultra-low emission zone from inner London to outer London, which they did last year. So then the campaign had another opportunity, and I managed to meet some of the very senior people at the Labour Party, and I knew the Tories were going to take the Mayor of London, who's Labour, to a judicial review. And I'd got the policy reviewed by solicitors and barristers who said it's a potential violation of the Human Rights Law and the Equality Act. And I said, if you don't give me what I want, I'll give the Tories the tool to defeat you in a judicial review. And then in January, they didn't exempt blue badge holders that I wanted. That's 250,000 blue badge holders in London. But they did exempt a number of DWP disability benefits, the main one being standard rate mobility PIP. And they extended grants from 2,000 to 5,000 to 10,000. And now I'm also the vice chair of the regional stakeholder network for Greater London with the disability unit. And they're creating a disability action plan. And the plan now is to create national policy where we exempt all blue badge holders from all clean air zones in England, because Bristol and Birmingham replicated the original disability discrimination from London's ultra-low emission zone, but haven't replicated the further reasonable adjustments. So I find when movements clash between the climate movement and the disability rights movement, I find that really fascinating, because they try to imply that it's a binary choice. Either you can have clean environments or you have accessible environments. But what I say to them is climate action must go hand in hand with climate justice and social justice. Otherwise, all we'll do is increase poverty and inequality for those that have already been the most disproportionately impacted.
So, last question. So, for someone sat in the room today who wants to make an impact or change, what advice would you give them?
I'd say first thing definitely is confidence and belief. If you don't believe in yourself, you can't expect anyone else to believe in you. Like, confidence is contagious. Like, next week, one of my favourite films, the second part comes out, called June. And they have a really sweet line in it called "Fear is the mind killer. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer." And if you look at our systems, like if you look at the benefit system, it's based upon this energy of fear. And if you have that energy of fear, are you really ever going to challenge a system? So I think having this confidence and belief that you can do whatever you want to do in life. Like, it was the Premier League that gave me the confidence to challenge NHS England. It was NHS England that gave me the confidence to challenge Greater London. We can do whatever we want to do in life. We just need to take that kind of step. The next thing I would say is this kind of inner change before outer change. Like, doing these silent meditation retreats like really does help me to kind of realize who I am in the inside. And we all have limiting beliefs. Like, if there's a conference and maybe I had a 1 second window of opportunity to put my hand up when I was asking the question to the Minister of Health and Social Care. But if I didn't have that inner belief in that time, that 1 second window of opportunity would have gone, somebody else would have put their hand up, and then the whole campaign wouldn't have happened. So this inner change, I think, is really critical before outer change. And then the last thing I would say is the power of lived experience. When I see systems value academic experience, they value work experience. So the missing component is lived experience. And that's where we can add so much value to the system. Because let's be honest, people around the boardroom table in these very large organizations, they do not understand the challenges that people are having in this modern day. People choosing between heating and eating. They do not understand, by them implementing a charge for a disabled person to go to a hospital, that might be the difference of them going to their appointment or not going to their appointment. Maybe that appointment, they will find out that they have cancer and they'll start the treatment of cancer at that point in time. If they didn't attend that appointment, maybe that wouldn't have happened. They do not understand the challenges because all of them are on 6-figure salaries and they're not worrying about paying a parking charge when they're going to hospital.
I think that's a brilliant point. So this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your story and the campaigns and the work that you've done with us. And we really appreciate you being here today. So thank you, and everyone, if you can join me in thanking Kush for joining us today. Thank you so much.